Alright guys, this case is incredible. The quality is out of this world. McPrue, which is a play on Mac Pro, makes a few different cases of varying sizes. This is the Apollo S Ultra, a large micro ATX case that can fit the largest components and that can fit a lot of fans and rads, and is the best thing I've ever put my hands on. I cannot get over the build quality of this thing. Everything is perfect, just perfect, down to the last minute detail. I just want to show you a comparison to some of my other favorite cases. It's a bit taller, longer, and wider than the Lian Li A3, but overall just better and more expensive. This is my N-Case M2, my Nanic R, and my formed T1. Just a reference if you're wondering about the size of this McPrue micro ATX case. And of course, for my console baddies out there, here's a PS5. Okay, let's get this thing apart and get it prepped for the build. These aluminum side panels are thick, light, and durable. No flimsiness going on here. And the little metal clip things won't be breaking off. Side-mounted fans and or a radiator can go on this bracket, but I won't be needing it, so I'm gonna remove it. A regular ATX power supply can get mounted at the front or on the front side of the case. I'm going to remove this bracket from here so I can install two 140mm fans for the front intake instead of having the power supply here. They do include an SFX PSU bracket that I will be using, and it's just going to go up here on the side up at the front. This is what I'm talking about right here. But we've got two 140mm Be Quiet fans to install before I do anything else. So let's start by removing the top panel of the case to give us ample space to get these fans installed. There's 8 screws that hold the top in place, and this is the most annoying thing about this case, in my opinion. The aluminum screws aren't magnetic, obviously because they're aluminum. Not too big of a deal, but it does suck when every other case, even the $1,000 Ziki cases, uses screws that are magnetic. And my god, is this panel thick. And I'm not talking the CK kind of thick, I'm talking double C. That's a stiff USB cable right there. ATX PSU bracket be gone. There's just 4 screws that hold it to the front panel. I could take the front panel off if I needed to. It's just more screws holding it in place, but I don't need to, and it's easier just to throw the fans in with this front panel already attached. And McPrue does give you the 8 screws needed to be able to mount fans up at the front. You aren't able to use regular fan screws that come with fans. You'll have to use these McPrue screws if you want to put these fans up at the front of this case. Alright, spec time. I'm using the very budget-friendly B850M gaming export from Gigabyte. The CPU is the 9800X3D. I'm using a Crucial SSD, who, by the way, just announced they are abandoning their consumer customers, instead focusing all their efforts into the AI sphere. Meaning it's a big kick in the junk for us gamers and hobby builders, because a major supplier of RAM is not going to be selling their stuff to the market of us consumers. And I'm afraid the other big enterprise divisions like Samsung and SK Hynix will do the same. It's going to get ugly, boys, more than any of us could have thought. And I'm afraid some of my favorite RAM and SSD brands are just going to get forced out of the consumer market altogether because these big enterprise suppliers are just not going to supply them with chips and RAM anymore. And speaking of RAM, I'm using this 32GB kit of Patriot Viper DDR5 6000. Patriot is one of my favorite brands who rely on buying the RAM from the big suppliers so they can rebrand it and sell it to us. Anyways, I'm just removing the stock cooler mounting hardware for this board. The motherboard standoffs come pre-installed into the case, so all I have to do is just plop the motherboard in place on the standoffs and start screwing. Okay, I realized I needed to install the optional case feet that I bought as an extra before I do anything with the case, like installing fans and a motherboard. The feet screws are right there and they are now all covered up, so I have to do a little bit of backtracking and remove the fan. No big deal. I'm just glad I remembered to do this now before the entire build was done. So yeah, this case is great and all with the Apple front grater panel and the build quality of it, but it's these case feet and the handles that I will end up putting on later that really make the case stand out and pop. The feet and handles are really the cherry on top. Sensational. Absolutely sensational. An incredible piece of art. The new Lian Li SP1000P, meaning Platinum, SFX PSU was sent for me to try out. 10-year warranty, quiet fan, thin, easy to manage cables. The aesthetic and design of this thing alone makes me want to use it over the trusty Corsair SF PSUs. Time will tell if this PSU is as good as the Corsair, but I'm excited to use this PSU on my channel moving forward for all of my ITX and some of the micro ATX builds. Now, it only comes with 2 PCI 8-pin cables, but one of them has a pigtailed second 8-pin on it. So if you're using a 9070 XT with 3 8-pin GPU connections like I'm going to be using here today, you'll have to use the pigtail connection with this PSU, meaning one cable from the PSU will pigtail into 2 connections on the GPU, effectively only using 2 cables to power a 3-connector GPU. This isn't a bad thing for this PSU using a 3-connector 9070 XT. My GPU today can pull up to 340 watts from a PSU, and each 8-pin connector has to be able to provide 150 watts per ATX standard. So that's 300 watts total from the 2 cables, plus 75 watts coming from the PCI lane itself, for a total headroom of 375 watts. Now, this Lian Li is built well and uses 16 American wire gauging for the 8-pin cables, so I'd personally be okay if my GPU is pulling more than 150 watts per cable, because these PSU cables are good quality. If the cables couldn't handle that, Lian Li would have just gave 3 8-pin cables instead of a pigtailed cable. Anyway, let's get this SFX bracket on the PSU and install it into the case. And just going back, you'll probably notice that I also plugged in a SATA power cable into my PSU because I'm going to need one of those for the all-in-one liquid cooler that I'm going to be using. I just got to remove this hard drive mount here to make room for the power supply bracket because it uses the same holes as the hard drive mount. And I can raise or lower the PSU position. I'm using a 360mm all-in-one up top, so I want the PSU to be low enough for that, but not low enough to be in the way of my GPU, so I might just have to adjust this later. But you can really fine-tune the PSU position in this case. Next up, I'm going to plug in the PSU power cable to the case's power extension that runs to the back of the case, just to get that out of the way. And then onto the motherboard power cables. This is the 8-pin CPU power up here and the motherboard 24-pin right here. And for that SATA power cable, there's actually a nice gap back here in between the fan and side of the case and power supply, where I'll be able to run and stuff away the SATA power connector that I'll be using for the all-in-one cooler. And that's what I did. It's all just neatly back here now. Alright, let's get the all-in-one cooler installed. This is the Sudoku Proteus 360. This thing has a really beautiful finish to it, and it really goes well with the case aesthetic and the overall look of the build I'm going for here. There's a lot going on with this cooler. It has a control box that fans, power, and RGB all has to go through, so it is kind of complicated, but it's still sort of simple, if that makes sense. This pump block design is so nice. Probably one of the nicest pump blocks I've ever seen. It's a shame it has to be covered by the digital display when this is all installed. I wish there were more simple brushed metal finishes on all-in-one coolers, kind of like what EK water blocks used to do with their Elite all-in-one coolers. The control box gets mounted to the side of the cooler via magnets, which is actually kind of neat. These are the 3 radiator fans going into the control box, and this is the RGB lighting for the cooler going into the control box here. This is the pump, power, and digital display data cable going into the box. This is the SATA power and USB data cable going into the box. And this is the cable I used to plug into the PWM header on the motherboard and RGB header. And this is an extra fan connection, which came in money for me because I can just plug my front fans in right here. No need to run that to the motherboard. So quite a lot going on with this cooler, and I'll also have to download the Sudoku software to be able to use all this. Anyways, let's get this bad boy mounted. And I couldn't quite get the cooler and top panel in. I was just a couple millimeters out of line here. The radiator was hitting the front fan screws. Not too big of a deal, I just gotta remove this and just kind of shuffle the radiator position a bit more to the back. And here I'm just plugging in the front case fans to the control box and the SATA power cable from the PSU as well. Now's the fun part where I run everything to the motherboard. PWM connection to the CPU fan header, the data cable to the USB header on the motherboard, the RGB to the motherboard, and I still have to do my front USB connections and power button connections. And yeah, this was quite the cable challenge, but I think I did a pretty good job with everything. I'm happy with it. There's the PWM from the control box to the CPU fan header. There's the data for the cooler via USB and the front power button LED, and the front panel USB ports. I just zip tied everything kinda, just bundled it all up in here. There's enough space in this case to be able to do all that. Time to mate the cooler to the CPU. First, just have to install the AM5 mounting hardware to the motherboard and also to the cooler. Then it's go time. And I just can't express how beautiful I think this cooler is. Especially this part that's gonna be covered. And of course, in typical Rabryn fashion, I have to take it all apart now because I want to install the top handles to the case because access is needed underneath where the radiator is all now nicely installed. So I should have realized this when I was putting the case feet on, that I would also need to put the case handles on before I built the computer. So bear with me while I rewind here so I can put the handles on. I just unplugged all the front panel connectors from the top panel and removed the panel from the radiator bracket and was able to just remove the panel itself and leave the all-in-one installed with all my cable management intact. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that's the last of my issues. And I say that foreshadowingly. Time now for the GPU. I went with the Gigabyte Gaming OC 9070 XT just to match the motherboard, and I think the aesthetic really goes well with the sort of overall look I'm going for with this build. Such a sexy system. I'm so excited to be done with this build. But time to experience my biggest issue of the build yet. The Sudoku cooler. I couldn't get the software to work properly. I had no control of the fans, the pump speed, or the RGB. I was able to get into the software, but the Proteus control box was not being recognized like how it is in this video, so I could not select it and customize anything. I watched multiple YouTube videos on it, reconnecting everything in case I messed something up. Nothing. The screen capture I'm showing you right now did not exist for me. So I just ripped it out, which is a shame because I was really excited about this cooler. I just got frustrated and didn't want to keep troubleshooting after hours of trying to figure this out. The good news is, I have this Atmos Stealth 360, and there's something to be said about how simple it is. Just 2 cables, one for the pump and one for the fans. No control box, no USB cable, no software, no SATA power cable from the power supply is needed. It's coolers like this that make me appreciate simplicity of building computers. Sometimes you gotta just go with one of the goats of cooling without all the extra bells and whistles that you don't need. So, Cooler Master it is. Yeah, boy. And I forgot to mention that Lian Li includes this little external power switch for the PSU because you can't access the switch on the PSU because it's obviously inside the case. So this is cool. Firing this thing up and playing a bunch of games on 1440p max settings, I couldn't get the CPU temps above 65 degrees, and the GPU only got above 60 degrees during quick spikes and never above 65 degrees. Every fan was set to just 40%. The airflow in this case is awesome, and I only have the front 2 fans and the all-in-one cooler fans. No rear fan, no bottom fans, no side fans, and air was moving plenty fine, all the while barely hearing fan operation. This case has awesome ventilation. I love the McPrue Ultra S. It's definitely a boutique case and you pay for it. $600 for the case, handle and feet. Obviously, it isn't worth it for the vast majority of people when everything else costs such an arm and a leg. And I mean, for this build in particular, I could have used a Lian Li A3 and used much more powerful components with that money. But I wanted to showcase the case. For me personally, I'm glad I bought it and I can't wait to do a full custom dual 360 loop in it in the new year.